Juniors and seniors, they are mingling together so well. So as we know, hypertension, discussing the today's topic now, hypertension as we know is got very high mortality and morbidity, and it's alone responsible for more than 50% cases of heart disease and stroke death. So calcium channel blockers are not new, they are one of the oldest drugs that we have been using. And amlodipine, as we know that it used to come in combination with atenolol, and we still see when we practice that the people are still having those amlopress 80 combination. It's a very old drug. So the calcium channel blockers now, the new calcium channel blockers have come up. There was a need because there was some disadvantage of the old ones, and especially the amlodipine causing reflex tachycardia and pedal edema. So I welcome here first of all, Dr. Sanskruti Chauhan. Ma'am is DM Nephro. She is working at present in the Department of Nephrology and Transplantation, Fortis Hospital. After doing her medicine from University of Kanpur, ma'am has done her MD medicine from KGMC Lucknow, and after that she did her DM from Ahmedabad, I think Institute of Research Ahmedabad. And she had been, a member of, in fact, the American Society of Nephrology as well. And she has cleared her European certificate examination, also MRCP. So welcome, ma'am. She'll be speaking on the benefits of azithromycin, a nephro perspective. Thank you.
Let's hear it from my daughter here.
So, hello everyone. So, we'll quickly begin with the topic for today, which is nephroprotection with calcium channel blockers. So, we've heard of nephroprotection with ACEs and ARBs. Today, we'll discuss a little bit about nephroprotection with CCBs, and in particular, the star for today is zelnidipine. So before we move forward to the topic at hand today, which is zelnidipine, I'd like to go over a brief reiteration of what is hypertension and why it should be controlled, some BP targets specifically to retard CKD progression and offer CV protection, albuminuria and why it needs to be aggressively targeted at the primary care physician level, treatment of hypertension, the need of the hour being combination therapy rather than monotherapy, and moving on finally to the topic at hand today, which is discussing a little bit about the zelnidipine, the new, and why I'll try to make a case for why it should be the new gold standard CCB. So, before I proceed any further, I'd like to offer a question to the members of the audience. How do you define hypertension? We don't have a lot of time, so anybody in the audience? Dr. Chauhan. What is hypertension?
What is hypertension? Hypertension?
Yes.
Hypertension is defined as blood pressure,
Yes.
which is more than the accepted standards for age.
Okay.
Alright, so as far as I remember, less than 18 years, any blood pressure which is more than 120/80,
Right.
and between 18 to 50
Right.
years of age, any blood pressure
Right.
which is more than 130/90, and any blood pressure beyond 50 which is more than again 150/90 is hypertension.
So this is a good attempt, but not the right answer.
Yes.
Anybody else in the audience? Yes, sir.
For me, hypertension is when I speak right and my wife gets angry. That is hypertension.
All right. So, yes, ma'am.
If systolic is more than 130 and diastolic is more than 90 for 3 consecutive
Right, ma'am.
readings, for any age, it will be called as hypertension.
Right, ma'am. Close enough. Yes,
It will be
sir.
less than 149.
Right, sir.
But because if we say 130, that is pre-hypertension.
Right, sir.
Less than 140, but in that case, it could
BP less than 120.
Right, sir.
That is very.
So, we'll stop the questions here.
Can I
This would be, yes, sir.
So, blood pressure above 130 by 80, probably hypertension. Recently, the European Society of Hypertension said that probably 140 by 90 in people who are more than 60 years of age. That is the criteria for hypertension. But people who have CAD with diabetes and other comorbidities would probably be benefited by blood pressure of 130 by 80. Am I right, Dr. Sushruti?
Close enough, sir. So, okay, we will take any.
Everyone is paid.
No more questions, no more answers from the audience. Yes, because otherwise this will become a lengthy discussion. So, in fact, hypertension is defined as that level of BP at which benefits of treatment, it could be lifestyle intervention, it could be drugs, or it could be a combination of both, which unequivocally outweigh the risks of treatment. This has to be categorically stated because you must remember that BP, cardiovascular risk and renal risk lie along a spectrum, a continuum. There is no single BP reading that you can call free of CV events upwards of a systolic BP of 115. So the actual CV risk begins as soon as the SBP begins to go above 115. This has been documented time and again in trials. The reason you require an arbitrary cutoff of 130-80, 140-90, 150-90 is so as to make definitions and treatment uniform across the globe, and also to make inclusion in trials uniform. Otherwise, it would become very random and rampant. So, BP, and this is just a very busy slide, but what I'd like to draw your attention to has. So, blood pressure has multiple components to it. One is your endogenous component, which is your RAS system, your sympathetic nervous system, endothelins, arginine, vasopressin, the gut metabolomics, immunoinflammation, the level of oxidative stress in the body. It has some genetic components, so largely essential hypertension is polygenic in inheritance. There are a few monogenic cases of hypertension, but we'd not like to get into that discussion today. Environmental factors, especially in a city like Delhi, where air pollution, noise exposure and heat are contributory factors to a high blood pressure. And of course, and often ignored, but probably one of the more important factors would be lifestyle, diet, alcohol, smoking, lack of physical activity, poor sleep quality and high levels of stress. The reason I brought this slide up is because in this day and age, you would not want the drug to target a single facet or a single pathogenetic pathway, seeing as you can that blood pressure has several different components to it. Now, as I have alluded to before, there is a continuous relationship between blood pressure, CV and renal events. This has been seen in all age groups and in all ethnic groups. Now, the reason why traditional guidelines focused on defining hypertension with a systolic blood pressure more than 140 is because it's been seen that majority of the mortality because of hypertension and disability burden is seen at a systolic blood pressure above 140. Largest number of SBP deaths, be it because of ischemic heart disease, hemorrhagic stroke or ischemic stroke, are when the BP starts shooting above 140, but the risk typically begins at a systolic BP of 115 or above. In fact, I'd like to draw your attention to this slide because it is so important even for patient counseling, that a 10 mm reduction in systolic blood pressure or a 5 mm reduction in diastolic blood pressure can reduce major CV events to the tune of 20%, stroke to the tune of 35%, and heart failure to the tune of 40%. This is not even the risk reduction you see with SGLT2 inhibitors. Another important and often overlooked objective of antihypertensive therapy is to reduce development of CKD and to retard progression of CKD to ESRD. Now the problem is that typically in pure hypertensives, renal function declines at a very slow rate. So for you to be able to actually demonstrate apparent benefits of BP lowering, it becomes very difficult in the clinic. Unfortunately, the protective effect of BP reduction, which is visible to the naked eye in terms of reduction of creatinine in follow-up, is only seen in patients who are fast CKD progressors, typically proteinuric CKD patients or diabetic nephropathy patients. But you should remember that time and again, randomized and non-randomized studies have shown that protective effects of BP lowering are seen towards, right from progression of CKD towards ESRD in both diabetic and non-diabetic nephropathy. Now, majority of BP guidelines would tell you to lower the systolic blood pressure in this green zone, which is a systolic blood pressure less than 140, and diastolic BP targets are consistent across all guidelines, that is a diastolic BP below 80. Now, the reason why you should first attempt lowering systolic BP to less than 140 is, as I've alluded to before, this accounts for major portion of protective effect of BP lowering. But by no means should you restrict BP lowering to just below 140. If a patient can tolerate it and a patient is not frail, less than 80, you must target reducing the systolic blood pressure to less than 130, which is now the recommended guideline, reducing the blood pressure to less than 130/80. And I'll get to this in a minute. In fact, if you look at the kidney-specific guidelines, the International KDIGO guidelines for hypertension control in CKD, the systolic blood pressure target is even more stringent, and kidney guidelines are very specific in recommending a systolic blood pressure target of less than 120, and there's a very specific reason behind it, because CKD population is uniquely predisposed to accelerated atherosclerosis, accelerated CV risk, and adverse cardiovascular events. So this level of systolic BP is not to reduce CKD progression, not to reduce development of ESRD, but only and only to offer CV protection. So now that we've had a background of why hypertension needs aggressive controlling, I'd like to get to this part, because I believe in primary care practice this is often ignored, and this is something which can begin at primary care level and then go on to tertiary care level. So albuminuria, and why should you aggressively target it? So I'll be very brief. I'd just like to draw your attention to a few details. Now, both cardiovascular diseases and chronic kidney disease have shared risk factors: hypertension, diabetes, chronic inflammation, obesity, and they have shared pathogenesis. So chronic inflammation, hemodynamic alterations, oxidative stress, endothelial damage. All of this results in damage to the glomerular filtration barrier. So the basement membrane gets damaged, there's a lot of podocyte apoptosis, endothelial dysfunction, and you end up leaking something in the urine called as albumin. In fact, if I can add, albumin in urine is the earliest marker of detecting kidney disease, even more sensitive than serum creatinine, which is a notoriously insensitive marker for detecting kidney disease. By the time your creatinine begins to increase above 1, you have practically lost 30 to 50% of your renal function. So the first marker that you should always screen for in any hypertensive is a spot urine albumin creatinine ratio. Now the next question is, why should you aggressively target proteinuria in the first place? So the reason is, this is again a very busy slide, but this is the heat map for CKD staging. So you have GFR ranging from normal to less than 15, which is ESRD, and you have albuminuria categories ranging from A1 to A3, with A1 being less than 30 milligrams in a day and A3 being more than 300 milligrams in a day. Now just a little attention from your side. If a patient has a normal serum creatinine but is leaking more than 300 milligrams of urine in his leaking more than 300 milligrams of albumin in his urine daily, which is a UACR more than 300, this person is at the same risk of having a stroke, having an adverse CV event and CKD progression as somebody who has a somebody who has an eGFR below 45, which is typically stage 3B CKD, and you have only 2 more stages left before you're declared ESRD. So it's the same risk here as it is here with a seemingly normal creatinine, which is why targeting albuminuria at primary care level and reducing it is of so much importance. This is also a very busy slide, but just 2 things which need your attention. be it a diabetic or a non-diabetic, and be it any level of GFR, so more than 60, 15 to 29, 30 to 59, across all categories you can see that if you fall in the A3 category, which is more than 300 milligrams of ACR, you stand to lose nearly 15% renal function every year. And if you're a non-diabetic, you stand to lose nearly 10% renal function every single year. And for your reference, KDIGO defines rapid CKD progression as a GFR decline of more than 5% per year. So you can see this is more than double, and this is almost triple of that number. In fact, a study which was done in combination of ACEs and ARBs, which was actually a negative trial to begin with, found out something which is of significance in this presentation today, which is that if you're able to, and this was a study done in a huge population deemed to be at high CV risk, so 20,000 patients with both albuminuric CKD, non-CKD, diabetics and non-diabetics. What they found was that if you were able to reduce albuminuria by even 50%, you had lower all-cause mortality, lower risk of CV events, and lower progression of CKD. So I think I've been able to convince the audience as to why albuminuria needs targeting at primary care level. So another thing that I'd like to talk to you about is that apart from hypertension directly impacting cardiovascular health and directly impacting kidney health, CKD also uniquely predisposes patients towards adverse CV events, accelerated atherosclerosis through some novel risk factors apart from, of course, the traditional risk factors of age, sex, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, etc. So the novel risk factors, if you can see here, the first and foremost is albuminuria. The second is secondary hyperparathyroidism, so elevated PTH, elevated FGF23, hyperphosphatemia, anemia, oxidative stress, endothelial damage, and just the cachexia and anorexia and protein energy wasting which ensues as CKD progresses. In addition, CKD uniquely predisposes you to stroke, and this risk is independent of its effect mediated through hypertension. And just to define some numbers for you, if somebody has stage 3 CKD, which is a GFR typically below in the range of 30 to 60, this person is at a 3-fold increased risk of stroke than the general population, and somebody on dialysis has a 7-fold increased risk of stroke as compared to the general population. On top of this, you have proteinuria. So proteinuria has a direct dose-response relationship with elevated levels of protein leakage in the urine, having an elevated risk of stroke. This is independent of hypertension, independent of the GFR. So now that we have this background in our mind about what hypertension is, what albuminuria is, how the CKD population is uniquely predisposed to adverse CV events and enhanced risk of stroke, and how proteinuria impacts all of that, we now move on to the treatment of hypertension. So this audience needs no introduction to the 4 pillars of hypertension treatment, which is ACEs and ARBs, CCBs, beta blockers and diuretics. Beta blockers being weak antihypertensives but being suitable antihypertensive options in certain populations. And I'm not going to go into the details of any of these, but just that every single guideline in this day and age would recommend starting with a dual combination therapy, especially if the BP is above 150/90 in your office. The reason is, as we've discussed in the first few slides, the pathogenesis of BP is multifactorial. You do not want to target one single pathway for BP control because you do not know what particular pathway is operative primarily in that individual. So, in fact, it's been seen in trials that rather than titrating the monotherapy to the maximum, waiting for that time, it's best to start with a combination therapy because results will be achieved faster and you'll be able to get your target BP in no time. Also, across the spectrum, all guidelines recommend starting treatment with, all guidelines recommend starting treatment with a combination of ACEs or ARBs with a calcium channel blocker because they are that effective as antihypertensives, or in certain population ACEs and ARBs with diuretic, titrating them to a maximum and then adding on another drug as you go along the line if your BP targets are not met. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the role of CCBs because that is what we are here to discuss today in CKD. Even the kidney-specific guidelines, the KDIGO guidelines, recommend starting treatment for hypertension in CKD for cardiovascular disease protection with CCBs along with, of course, a RAS inhibitor. Now, as I've told you before, CKD patients are at a uniquely high risk of stroke. Hypertension puts you at a very high risk of stroke. CCBs have a greater effect on stroke reduction than any other class of antihypertensive because of some unique properties. It is for the same level of BP reduction achieved. This is something which is unique to this class of antihypertensives. Also, they have been found in literature to be more effective than beta blockers. Also, they've been found in literature to be more effective than beta blockers in slowing the progression of carotid atherosclerosis, reducing LVH, and in reducing proteinuria. So even the International Society of Hypertension in 2020 recommends CCBs as the first-line antihypertensive agents, either in combination with a diuretic or in combination with a RAS inhibitor. Now that we know that calcium channel blockers are first-line antihypertensives, no discussion on CCBs can begin without having a background knowledge of what kind of calcium channels there are and what kind of calcium channel azenlidipine blocks in comparison to amlodipine. So primarily there are 4 types of channels. We will not go into the details of this. We have L, we have P and Q, we have N, and we have T. The kidney harbors all these 4 channels, of course different channels in different locations, but what I'd like to draw your attention towards today is specifically the efferent and the afferent arteriole. So I'll just revise your pathology a little bit. Afferent arteriole is the feeder arteriole, the one which brings blood into the glomerulus, and efferent is the one which draws blood outside the glomerulus, so it's the post-glomerular arteriole. Now, understanding this hemodynamic is of extreme relevance today because this will make the case for why azenlidipine should be the new gold standard. Efferent arteriole carries both T and N-type calcium channels, whereas the afferent arteriole, in addition to the T and N-type calcium channel, also carries the N-type calcium channels. So when you antagonize the N-type calcium channels, which is what amlodipine does, you essentially dilate this, you increase the intraglomerular blood flow, you increase the intraglomerular hypertension, you increase the intraglomerular pressure because the efferent arteriole remains constricted. Whereas if you were to block or antagonize the T-type calcium channel, which is on both afferent and efferent arteriole, you would be essentially dilating both. So there will be no net increase in the intraglomerular pressure, no intraglomerular hypertension, and in fact the intraglomerular pressure has been found to go down in treatment with a T-type calcium channel blocker. Now, majority of these studies on azenlidipine have come out of Japan because this was the molecule which was discovered in Japan and then for a long time has been a mainstream antihypertensive there. So amongst the first studies that came out of Japan, they really focused on the critical role of T-type calcium channels in the efferent arteriolar tone, in mediating the efferent arteriolar tone, and how this channel is important in development of CKD through actions which are multifaceted and not only restricted to hemodynamics but also hormonal and inflammatory factors. Again, a very busy slide, but just these things which need your attention. So N-type calcium channel is located in the afferent arteriole. Dilating it means you are increasing the intraglomerular pressure. N-type calcium channels are also located in the vascular smooth muscle cells. So it results in net vasodilation. There is a fall in the systemic blood pressure. There is reflex activation of the baroreceptors, reflex activation of the sympathetic nervous system, and you experience tachycardia, a vexing side effect with amlodipine. T-type calcium channels, on the other hand, are located in the sinoatrial node in the adrenal gland, and for the discussion today, afferent and efferent arterioles. So as I've alluded to before, you dilate both these arterioles, intraglomerular pressure will not increase. In fact, in studies has been found to be decreased. When you block the T-type calcium channels in the adrenal glands, it reduces the aldosterone not synthesis but secretion. And how this is beneficial for both kidney and heart, we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Yeah, so I'll wind up at 10 minutes. I have yet to talk about azenlidipine. So quickly then, because it antagonizes the T-type calcium channel in the sinoatrial node, there is no reflex tachycardia. In fact, the pulse rate has been found to decrease on treatment. So now moving on to the star of today, which is zenlidipine. Now these are the various calcium channels which have come out in the last few decades. Why the need for a zenlidipine was felt is because we don't want our antihypertensives to do the bare minimum, which is just to control BP. You want your drugs to do more. You want a drug which will offer end organ protection, which is exactly what a zenlidipine does. From my perspective, how it offers renal protection is what I'll get to. And apart from that, it ameliorates the vexing side effect of pedal edema, which is witnessed with amlodipine, as well as reflex tachycardia, which you're all aware of. So as I've told you before, zenlidipine blocks both the T-type calcium channels in afferent and efferent arteriole. Intraglomerular pressure reduces. There is reduced intraglomerular injury and there is a greater reduction in urine albumin creatinine ratio witnessed with therapy on a zenlidipine as opposed to amlodipine, which in fact increases intraglomerular pressure and can worsen proteinuria. Another important and novel thing about the zenlidipine is that it's a highly lipid soluble drug. So despite having a half-life of only 8 hours, it is retained in the vascular wall long after it is cleared from the circulation. So you continue to experience prolonged hypotensive effects with just once a daily dose. And because it contributes to BP reduction by more than one mechanism, it is an effective antihypertensive. As I've told you before, it antagonizes the T-type calcium channels in the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal glands, which helps in reducing your aldosterone levels, antagonizes the action of aldosterone in the kidney, and it's a weak natriuretic agent as well. And it does all that by not causing reflex tachycardia and by not causing an increase in the intraglomerular pressure. The first study to come out to attest to its hypertensive efficacy and safety was again out of Japan in combination with timocaparil, which was an ACE inhibitor, and it showed that combination therapy with the zenlidipine and ACE inhibitor is an effective treatment in hypertensive diabetic populations. Now you may ask, to what extent can a zenlidipine be expected to lower the systolic and diastolic BP? So in studies, in human studies, in fact, it's been shown that it can reduce systolic blood pressure to the tune of 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury and diastolic blood pressure to the tune of 10 to 15 millimeters of mercury, and the heart rate also goes down on therapy to a mean of around 60 to 65 beats per minute. In fact, head-to-head comparison with amlodipine 5 mg and zenlidipine 16 mg showed that it is an equally efficacious antihypertensive, if not more. Another positive finding with the zenlidipine is that it is a sympatho-inhibitory agent, so it also blocks the T-type calcium channels on the sympathetic nerve terminals, inhibits autonomic activation, and so suppresses cardiovascular response to exercise more effectively than amlodipine. And we know that the hypertensive population is uniquely predisposed to activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So this benefit again can be exploited in management of essential hypertension. So just coming to the renal protection in the last part of the presentation, now we know that cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease and diabetic nephropathy is characterized by a state of endothelial dysfunction and oxidative stress. Renal protective effects of a zenlidipine have been seen in vitro as well as in vivo. It has been seen that treatment with the zenlidipine suppresses aldosterone and its downstream interaction with the aldosterone receptor dependent oxidative pathways, as a result of which it ameliorates renal injury because of this oxidative stress. Apart from that, it has also been seen that it improves the peritubular capillary blood flow by enhancing the renal plasma flow, improving the blood flow in the kidney by favorably impacting the renal hemodynamics. It is shown to reduce long-term glomerular injury and tubulointerstitial injury. So CKD is characterized by progressive loss of peritubular capillaries, and ensuing hypoxia makes the loss of peritubular capillary and tubulointerstitial injury worse. By favorably impacting both the efferent and afferent arteriolar hemodynamics, azelnidipine increases PTC blood flow, improves renal hypoxia, and reduces downstream tubular interstitial injury mediated by this hypoxia. And this has been demonstrated in a study. It was a beautiful study published in NDT a decade ago, which showed that in CKD patients there is a decline in peritubular. Additional advantages of why you should put your patient on azelnidipine is because it reduces serum uric acid levels, decreases markers of inflammation, and then just the last slide. Now there is no real way of finding out how hypoxic your kidney is short of a bold MRI. A non-invasive marker in the urine is L-type fatty acid binding protein. And they did a study in Japan a decade ago when they found that if you put your patients on azelnidipine versus amlodipine and monitor markers of renal hypoxia and oxidative stress, it was seen that azelnidipine not only reduced protein excretion but also urinary 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, which is a marker of oxidative stress in the kidney, and L-type fatty acid binding protein till 6 months of therapy. And so its renoprotective action was not only because it is a potent antihypertensive but also because it has potent antioxidant effects. So with this I'd like to come to a conclusion. I think I've made my case for why you should consider azelnidipine as a strong contender to the traditional gold standard amlodipine, because it offers definite additional renoprotective advantages, and I'm sure Sir will allude to in his presentation cardioprotective advantages as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the nice presentation. I think we'll take question answers in the end. Now I call very senior consultant interventional cardiologist Dr. Rajiv Rajput. Sir has got an experience of more than 30 years, and he had been a fellow of International Interventional Cardiology and Heart Failure at St. Vincent's Australia College. Sir had been a DNB teacher for more than 20 years and has got a lot of publications under him. So sir will be discussing on current update on hypertension with focus on CCDs.
Very good. करनी पड़ी
Good evening. Hello. Yeah. Good evening, friends. For next 15-20 minutes, we will be discussing about how to manage blood pressure, which we have been managing for last many decades. I will just briefly touch upon what are the important new developments or what are the important facts to be kept in mind, because whatever your key area of practice, you cannot avoid managing patients of high blood pressure. Now, my previous speaker has covered many important aspects about the importance and the pathophysiology, and especially highlighted about in a very nice way about renoprotective effect of newer calcium channel blocker. But I'll just go a little back and just highlight few more things. Now, if I ask you what is one factor, if you have an opportunity to change, which will save most lives, most hospitalization and most morbidity? That is high blood pressure. Single most important factor to prevent mortality and to reduce morbidity is high blood pressure. इतनी गड़बड़ तो मत करो यार। अभी तो आ रहा stroke, heart failure, coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease and renal failure. Nearly 1.5 billion people in the world are suffering from high blood pressure. Half of the stroke and heart failure can be attributed to high blood pressure. Half of heart failure and strokes. The strongest correlation of hypertension is with stroke and heart failure. The problem is low detection. Most of the time blood pressure is not detected. Person is not aware that he is having high blood pressure. And the reason is, many a times when a person goes to a doctor and if he is not physician or goes for some other non-medical problems, very often it is not, you can imagine that blood pressure is not taken many times. Second, blood pressure patients are asymptomatic. They don't have any problem, so they don't get their blood pressure measured. And the third important factor is, it is variable. Blood pressure can fluctuate like this. You might go to a doctor twice and both the time blood pressure might be here and it is not detected. So because of these factors, it is not detected. Second, even if it is detected, it is very likely that patient either will not start treatment, or even if he starts treatment, he will not continue treatment, or even if he continues treatment, it will be very half-hearted treatment without achieving a target. So not correct guideline directed treatment is very unlikely. And third is, that's why because of these two factors, whatever we could prevent is not possible. So nearly whatever damage can be prevented, we are able to prevent only 1/3 of that. 2/3 we are not able to prevent because it is neither detected, or it is not treated properly, or it is not treated adequately. So the answer is opportunistic testing and screening programs. Whenever you get a chance, whenever you see a patient, make sure you measure his blood pressure. Many times you may be surprised, and patient is also surprised that his blood pressure is high. Second, about the treatment part, as a physician, and we should be more aware, and as a patient, they should be counseled more in detail about the need and about the utility of this treatment. This slide I have just to put, just to see how we classify blood pressure these days. Dr. Sukriti has briefly mentioned that normal is 120, normal is less than 130, 80, right? 130 to 89 and 80 to 89 is high normal. 140 to 159, 90 to 99 is grade 1. Grade 2 is 160 to 179, 100 to 109, grade 2. And grade 3 is more than 180 by 110. This is no more confusion. This is the most recent 2023 classification of high blood pressure.
Sir, just very important.
I can mail you these slides, don't worry. The next question is, there is so much information about which blood pressure is important. Is it office blood pressure? Is it out of office blood pressure? And as far as out of office blood pressure is concerned, we have home monitored blood pressure and we have ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. There are several differences. Home monitoring means somebody is monitoring blood pressure. It can be patient himself, his relatives, paramedical staff, local physician, in usual surroundings. And ambulatory blood pressure is by a instrument which periodically, whatever time interval you set, say 20 minutes, half an hour, it keeps measuring the blood pressure. Although most of us believe that out of the office blood pressure is more predictive of the outcome, in most clinical practice, most of our decisions and most randomized trials have happened on the basis of office blood pressure. So for all practical purposes, most of our decisions are made by the readings we record in the clinic. I will briefly touch upon So, as I said, both home blood pressure and ambulatory blood pressure are more reproducible. Better predictor of hypertension mediated organ damage. They are more reliable as far as day-to-day variability is concerned, more likely to diagnose white coat hypertension and mass hypertension. ABPM also has some drawbacks because most of you must have ordered ABPM. Patient, there is an inflation of the cough and patient notes that he is going to have his blood pressure measured. So similar findings, similar anxiety, similar adrenergic effect can happen once he knows that his blood pressure is going to be monitored. But ABPM tells you more about 24 hours pattern and especially about day-to-day, intraday variability and especially how does blood pressure behaves at night, which is called dipping or non-dipping pattern. Home blood pressure on the other hand is simpler, less costly, does not require a specific instrument, but again repeated measurement can cause anxiety, and you must have seen many times that your patient records blood pressure more often and then rings you, my blood pressure is now 150/90, what to do? So that also creates anxiety and too many frequent adjustments in the treatment. Most important, we have cutoff for blood pressure treatments which is based on blood pressure measured by clinician, but we have no cutoff in as far as ABPM and home blood pressure monitoring is concerned. However, the message I want to give today is that if you have a patient with 2-3 extremes, one, somebody with mild hypertension with lot of target organ damage, and somebody with severe hypertension and no target organ damage, too much fluctuations of blood pressure, these are the patients who should be monitored by either home blood pressure or by ambulatory, whatever is available to you. The message is these two modalities should be used more often than what we use them currently. History taking examination, all of you are more experienced clinician than I am, but smart physical history and a few simple tips, like if you measure if you just remember that whenever you see a patient first time, you will palpate both his radial and put your hand on his femoral, Takayashu, coarctation of aorta, and at least once put your stress on abdomen, you might pick up some renal bruise. Sugar, lipid profile, ECG. That's all. Beyond that is not required in most of the cases. So this is the bare minimum essential workup of a hypertensive patient. Now, if you remember 4-5 causes, and if you go back to this slide can give you 90% diagnosis of secondary hypertension. And I'll show you in this slide. These are the causes which explain 90% of secondary hypertension. But if you do simple urine examination of bruit, ultrasound if required, serum potassium, unprovoked hypokalemia without a reason, if potassium is consistently less than 4, primary hyperaldosteronism. Pheochromocytoma is many times very clear by good history taking, and Cushing syndrome. If you see the typical profile of a Cushing syndrome patient, so by this simple test and by examination, you can identify 90% of your patients with secondary hypertension. When you decide to treat hypertension, lifestyle modification is by far the first step at any level of hypertension. Mild, moderate, stage 2, stage 3, whatever you decide, whatever your patient is, lifestyle modification is the first thing to be explained. And what exactly is lifestyle modification? Weight reduction. Whatever way you want to do, exercise, GLP-1 analog, Rybelsus, whatever is suitable for that patient. Adopt DASH eating plan. Lots of fruits, vegetables, reduced content of saturated fats, etc. That includes, this diet has high potassium content also. Dietary sodium restriction. All of you are aware that in India we eat twice or thrice the salt which is required. So cutting down the salt can be an important part of blood pressure measurement. You can reduce your salt, you can replace your normal salt by low sodium salt. That gives the same salty taste with half the sodium content. So that's also useful. Physical activity and keeping the alcohol consumption under limit. These are the 5 things which every patient should be explained. And on the right hand you can see expected reduction in blood pressure. So if you can see, if you have this stage 1 hypertension and you explain them and your patient follows all of them, stage 1 hypertension in most of the cases, mild hypertension can be corrected by lifestyle modification. Now the next question is, lifestyle modification is not enough. What to do? Which drug to use? So when deciding about the drugs, there are 2 things to be remembered. One, there are some patients when a particular type of drug has to be used. That is called compelling indication. To give you an example, if your patient of high blood pressure has CAD, क्या यूज करना है? Beta blocker. If your patient of high blood pressure has heart failure, क्या जरूरी यूज करना है? RAS inhibition, SGLT2, whatever. So this is a list of compelling indication. Similarly, there is a list of compelling contraindication. अगर आपके पेशेंट को सीवियर रिएक्टिव एस्थमा है, तो क्या यूज नहीं करना है? गाउट है, हाइजाइड, लो हार्ट रेट है, PR प्रोलॉन्ग्ड है, बंडल ब्रांच ब्लॉक है, तो क्या यूज नहीं करना है? बीटा ब्लॉकर, diltiazem, isopten type of medication. So this is a list of compelling contraindication. तो ये याद रखना है, वो याद रखना है. अब सवाल बचा, ये कुछ भी नहीं है, कोई कंपेलिंग इंडिकेशन नहीं है, कोई कंपेलिंग कंट्राइंडिकेशन नहीं है, तब कौन सी दवा यूज करना है? तो इसलिए 2-3 चीजें याद रखने की हैं कि हाउ द ब्लड प्रेशर ट्रीटमेंट हैज इवॉल्व्ड. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, देयर वर ट्रायल्स showing drug A, B, C, D against placebo in hypertensive patient. First point was to prove that it is possible to reduce blood pressure, and this blood pressure reduction medicine is not causing any harm. Then came the stage 2, comparing drug A versus drug B, and then combinations, various combination came. So I will just, this is the list just to tell you that there have been so many trials involving these ABCD. Now can you tell me what is ABCD of blood pressure? A is RAS inhibitor, A is ARB, and now ARNI. What is B?
Beta blocker.
What is C? What is D? डायबिटीज. सो आपको इन चार में से कोई यूज दवाई करनी है, ठीक है. अब ये कैसे इवॉल्व हुई थेरेपी आप देखिए. सबसे पहले ट्रायल आई एलाहाड ट्रायल. एलाहाड के पहले कोई मेजर कंपैरेटिव ट्रायल नहीं थी. तो एलाहाड कंपेयर्ड लिसिनोप्रिल व्हिच इज ए वर्सेस amlodipine which is C versus chlorthalidone which was D. And this trial showed that all three were equal. There were some minor differences, like diuretics will be more effective in preventing heart failure, so it was. Amlodipine will be more effective in preventing stroke, so was it. But if you see the primary endpoint as a whole, the graphs were flat. So this proved that A, C, D were equal. Then came, this was the graph, almost parallel, no difference. Then came live trial. This compared B versus A, losartan based treatment versus atenolol based treatment. And this trial showed that A, losartan was better than B, beta blocker based treatment. So out of ABCD, B got left behind. So we now left with ACD. Then came Escort BPLA trial. नाम याद रखने की जरूरत नहीं, just to highlight how it worked. This compared A plus C versus B plus D. A plus C versus B plus D, and it showed that A plus C was better. Again, B plus D was in the background. Again we left with ACD, how to dissect it further. Then came Accomplished trial, which compared A plus C versus A plus D, and then A plus C was better. So A, C, D, B. That is the sequence of events in large, randomized, multi-center, big trials. And that's why most of the recommendation is you start with A, oblique C, oblique D. If not enough, you combine 2. If not enough, you combine 3. If not enough, you combine beta blocker at any point of time, centrally acting, alpha blocker, etc. etc. The choice is, the recommendation is for first and second drug. After that, it is up to you. So, how to start treatment? If it is high normal, should you use drugs? Very rarely, except if somebody has CAD, CKD, very high risk group, exceptional. 2B, 2B matlab avoid, but can use but avoid. Lifestyle modification for all. Yellow line is grade 1, immediate drug treatment in high risk or very high risk patient. Otherwise, start lifestyle modification, wait for 3 to 6 months, see how your patient behaves, and then start treatment. Is grade 2, lifestyle, immediate treatment for all. And stage 3, immediate treatment for all. So, in this side, you can wait, see the effect of lifestyle modification in 3 to 6 months time, and if lifestyle modification is not enough, you can start drug therapy. Now, most of you, we'll just go a little further about each drug. just 1 minute each. Beta blockers, initially they were landmark trials and all trials were positive. Atenolol was the star. Most of the patients before 2000 or before 1990, atenolol, tenoric, and the most sellable combination, amlopres 80. So many patients are still, millions of patients are still in India, especially the semi-urban and rural areas are still on amlopres 80. Very effective combination, except pedal edema, nothing happens, and very potent combination. But then it is not effective in preventing stroke. And why so? Because it does not reduce the central aortic pressure as effectively as other class of the drugs do. Second, it has got important side effect profile. New onset diabetes, effect on dyslipidemia, and sexual dysfunction, erectile dysfunction in young patients. But you see, as we discussed in our first slide, there are so many patients of hypertension who has compelling indication to use blood pressure, to use beta blocker. Resting heart rate more than 80. More so, the newer beta blockers like carvedilol and nebivolol were not included, were not studied in those trials which have got additional vasodilator effect. So, can we extrapolate those results to these new beta blockers? We don't know. In 2023 guidelines, they have listed 26 conditions where beta blockers are the drug of choice in hypertension. So although they are not reflecting in ABCD, they are now ACD, but in actual clinical practice, many patients will be on beta blocker like emergency treatment, perioperative treatment, major non-cardiac surgery, OSA, migraine, etc. etc. So beta blockers cannot be written off, especially those who have higher heart rate and other compelling indications. Beta blocker is the choice. Little bit about diuretic. All major trials before say 1990 used thiazide-like diuretics. Chlorothiazide was the commonest drug used. But then it has got two important side effects: hyponatremia and new onset diabetes mellitus. Then came chlorthalidone. The difference is chlorthalidone is more potent, milligram to milligram wise, and has got longer duration of action, truly once a day. Initially it was believed that it will be better tolerated, side effect will be less, it is a better molecule, but now thousands and thousands of patients, and more recently a LEGEND trial which is head-to-head comparison between chlorothiazide and chlorthalidone found them to be equal. So whatever the side effects of hydrochlorothiazide will be the side effect of chlorthalidone.
So please try to finish in under 5 minutes. Please try to finish in another 5 minutes.
Okay. So all these drugs are effective up to eGFR of 30. If eGFR is less, you can add on loop diuretics, especially furosemide or torsemide, both are same, especially if patient is volume overloaded. Stroke and heart failure prevention is maximum. What about MRA? Mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. They are used in resistant hypertension. The fear is of hyperkalemia. More recently, finerenone has been found to be effective in diabetic, CKD and hypertension, where it improves blood pressure, heart failure and renal outcome. RAS inhibition is very important. As I said, A, B, C, D. A is this. Lot of trials with ACE inhibitors, but ACE inhibitors can cause cough in 5 to 10% patients, angioedema, though rare but can happen. So you have seen in last 2 decades, ARBs have replaced ACE inhibitor in uncomplicated hypertension in most of the scenario because they are better tolerated. ARNI can be effective, maybe 2-3 years from now, we will use more and more ARNI in hypertension. Just to share with you, when this molecule came, it came as antihypertensive medication. They were phase 1, phase 2 trial. But then Suddenly the heart failure field took over and Army got shifted to heart failure. But now there is some resurgence of use of this molecule in hypertension. It is approved in Japan and China, but in US and Europe it is still not recommended. Calcium channel blockers are one of the most extensively studied molecules in hypertension. Safe, effective, amlodipine, cheap, safe, causes fetal edema and reflex tachycardia. So if you are combining with beta blocker, it is fine. Otherwise, these are the two side effects. So we have got list of newer molecules which inhibit both L and N type of molecule. Azellitidine is one of them. So it will not cause fetal edema. It will be on 16 milligram will be as effective as 5 milligram amlodipine. It will have, because of negative sympathomimetic effect, it will be cardioprotective as well as renoprotective. So azellitidine is amlodipine minus fetal edema minus reflex tachycardia with additional cardio and renoprotective. Because it inhibits both L and T type. A word about combination therapy. Most of your patients will not be controlled with one medication. So you have two options. Either you keep increasing the dose of one or you add the drug number 2. So what happens if you increase the dose? Effect is not doubled. Effect is only marginally high, 20%. Side effects are doubled. So if you need to have more effect, it is better to combine. It is better to combine. Combination is often synergistic. It is like 1 plus 1 is not 2. 1 plus 1 is like 11. If not 11, more than 2. And usually the combination are such that side effect of the one drug are taken care by the side effect of the second drug. Amlodipine tachycardia beta blocker reduces tachycardia. Amlodipine, CCB, fetal edema, diuretic reduces fetal edema. Combination therapy acts faster, leads to better BP control, has lesser side effects, better adherence and better clinical outcome. This is a new concept. Like in anticoagulation, all of you must have heard time in therapeutic range. How much time INR is in between 2 to 3. So similarly, you should see how much time your patient blood pressure is less than 140/90 or less than 130/80. That is called time in target. And it has been seen that if blood pressure is 50% time in the controlled range versus less than 50% time in controlled range, there is 74% reduction in endpoint of death, stroke, and 47% reduction in mortality. So that means it is not enough to start blood pressure medicine. You have to make sure that you keep up increasing the medication till you get to the target, and you continue with target and keep monitoring for side effects. New onset diabetes, maximum with diuretic and beta blocker. That's why in pre-diabetic, prone to diabetic, avoid using them unless there is a compelling indication. Drug is very good. There are many examples, but they are not tolerated well. So patient will stop taking them. So adherence is directly proportional to side effects. And if you look at ARBs, ACE inhibitors, CCBs, they are most tolerated, placebo-like side effects. I think I'll skip that. So dear friends, then what is new in hypertension is the fact that we must realize that we have to diagnose more and more hypertensive patients. We have to educate them to continue treatment. They have to start their treatment and keep them on long-term treatment so that mortality and morbidity reduction can be achieved.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Please have a seat.
Sanchiti.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful presentation and make the things very simple. So before we go for the talk, I call 3 panelists also on the chair. Dr. Sushil Chauhan, Dr. Harishankar Mishra, Dr. Saab is Associate Professor in ILBS. Dr. Chauhan, please. And Dr. S.K. Colonel S.K. Mathur, please.
Sir is not there.
Okay. So to summarize the things, Dr. Saraswati had explained very nicely that how important it is to measure albuminuria also. Despite having the normal GFR, if you have a poor albuminuria, still the patient will have a poor outcome. And the risk of getting a stroke in CKD5 patients, which is more than 7.1 fold. Since I also had my thesis in CKD patients only, I think one of my article I read that the chances of getting heart attack, MI, is more than 40 times in CKD patients, and I was amazed. I told my professor that it's almost like a patient is sitting on a bomb when he's on a regular dialysis. So, and noting the blood pressure, sir has explained very well, and the stage of hypertension like till 130/80, it's normal, but in CKD patients you need to have it around 120/80. Stage 1 140, stage 2 160, and stage 3 and anything above 180. So I think the house is open for discussion if there are any questions.
My first question is to Dr. Saraswati, Dr. Lathur sir. I would like to ask her any advantage of using azelaprine over amlodipine, the standard of care in hypertension, as far as albuminuria is concerned.
So, I think it was very clear in the presentation that because it impacts both the afferent and efferent arteriolar tone, and there's no preferential treatment there, it reduces the intraglomerular pressure, so it decreases the urine albumin creatinine ratio more effectively than amlodipine. In fact, it's been seen that apart from amlodipine achieving good BP control, it negatively impacts proteinuria. So the only real proteinuria reduction with amlodipine is because it reduces BP and so brings down the intraglomerular pressure. But otherwise, using amlodipine for proteinuria reduction is not the recommendation.
I would like to ask Dr. Rajiv Rajput sir, in a setting of acute coronary syndrome, once you discharge the patient sir, and if we need to control blood pressure, hypertension associated with ACS, your drug of choice, there has been a lot of disrepute of nifedipine. It has gone out of use because of tachycardia. Amlodipine is not used much also in that setting. Beta blockers are the drug of choice. Sir, I would like to like your comment, given that azelaprine causes bradycardia as compared to amlodipine, it decreases heart rate. Are you using azelaprine in the setting of acute coronary syndrome?
No, I think as far as acute coronary syndrome, it will not be first or second choice. It can come later, third, fourth choice if blood pressure is still high. First will be beta blocker and then followed by ACE inhibitor or ARB. And then if you have to use some kind of CCB, then possibly azelaprine. As I said, lot of meetings, every time it is discussed, what is the evidence for azelaprine? There has been no long-term big RCT with azelaprine. Probably there will never be, because nobody would like to conduct. It's a class effect most likely. It is like amlodipine with some additional advantages: no pedal edema, no reflex tachycardia, and potential additional cardiac value. That's it.
Sir, I would like to ask you, as you said, beta blockers are the drug of choice. And even in hypertension chart, you showed that beta blockers are quite higher, almost as at a level of calcium channel blockers. If we were to use beta blockers, and if we were to use a calcium channel blocker, both causing bradycardia, will that be a good combination? Using a beta blocker, let's say metoprolol, along with azelaprine. Your comment?
No, it is to be understood that azelaprine does not cause reflex tachycardia. It does not have a profound bradycardic effect. So it can be used safely, can be used with beta blocker. There's no doubt about it. And I think that's all.
Yes, sir. Sir, I would like to ask Dr. Sancheti. We have been using Similidipine for the last about 1.5 decade with good effect for proteinuric effect in CKD. You showed some slides comparing azilindipine with amlodipine. Any head-to-head comparison of azilindipine with cilnidipine as far as this proteinuria effect is concerned?
So no major randomized controlled trials, and like sir said, there will never be. It doesn't make sense to compare two CCBs because CCB is never the first line of drug for proteinuria reduction. ACEs and ARBs are. But when you talk about combinations, ACEs and ARBs in combination with either cilnidipine or in combination with zelnidipine are beautiful because they A, help in reducing BP, B, help in bringing down the proteinuria. There's been no major trial comparing zelnidipine with cilnidipine. There have been small studies, there is anecdotal evidence, and on that note, cilnidipine has a much more profound anti-proteinuric effect when you compare it to a zelnidipine.
Okay, so as I understand, the standard of care ACE and ARB, azilindipine is just an add-on for the proteinuric effect. It is not the first line drug.
So yes, not the first line drug ever. The first line of drug will, at least in CKD, proteinuric CKD patients will always and always be ACEs and ARBs unless there is a, like sir said, a compelling contraindication to not give them, like renal artery stenosis, single kidney with renal artery stenosis and proteinuria. Patient is uniquely predisposed to develop side effects on ACE therapy. Even hyperkalemia has a relative contraindication, not an absolute contraindication, because all current kidney guidelines would tell you to give as many anti-hyperkalemic measures as possible, including binders, bicarb, diuretics, to lower the serum potassium, because there is just that much overarching benefit of keeping a patient on ACE and ARB, including not just proteinuria reduction but also reducing cardiovascular mortality, because that's what the patient will die from, not because of progression of CKD, but they'll likely suffer a cardiovascular event even before they progress to stage 5 CKD.
Right. My last question to Dr. Rajiv Rajput sir. Uncomplicated hypertension, not controlled on ACE, ARB, beta blockers. Sir, your calcium channel blocker of choice.
Now, I think gradually we are shifting away from amlodipine. So either initially, now it's for last 5-6 years it was mainly cilnidipine. We have to remember that 5 mg of cilnidipine, 5 mg of amlodipine would be like at least 10 BD or maybe 20 BD of cilnidipine, remembering that they are not as potent, and similarly 5 mg of amlodipine will be 16 mg of azilindipine. But that's where newer prescriptions, there is more and more uses of cilnidipine and azilindipine.
Sir, we have Dr. Harishankar here, who is working in a tertiary liver hospital. Dr. Hari, I would like to ask you, in patients with compromised liver, what is your calcium channel blocker of choice, and what are your considerations?
Mostly when we see a patient is having CKD and the patient is also having CRT, liver is compromised. Mostly in liver patients, potassium level is not on the highest factor. That's why the first line of choice we keep it as AC and only on second line we go with CCB. CCB there is no absolute contraindication, only group specific we can go with cilnidipine or azilindipine or amlodipine. But again, the least we go for amlodipine just because the patient is already having hypervolemia and edema and extra. So we just try to avoid amlodipine in that case.
Dr. Chakravarti sir, you have the mic.
Thank you, Dr. Sushil ji, for giving me this chance to really talk to Dr. Latha. Very well moderated, wonderful. I have two comments to make. Number one, we used to hear the dimode added like father, like son. I like to change, like to like father, like daughter. Congratulations, Dr. Samsidi, for wonderful deliberation, number one. Number two, I have a question for Dr. Rajiv sir. अक्सर मेरी मिसेस डॉक्टर रजनी, शी इज अ डॉक्टर, आज मेरा सर दर्द हो गया, बीपी चेक कर, मैं बीपी चेक करता हूँ नॉर्मल किसी में, एक बार और चेक करो, एक बार और चेक करो, आई वांट टू हैव द मीडियन के 3, इज इट जस्टिफाइड और नॉट? आई वांट टू हियर फ्रॉम द हॉर्सेस बॉब.
So how do you get
Home monitoring I am telling you.
how do you get to the right blood pressure?
Yeah.
Frequent monitoring.
जिस दिन वो टेंशन में नहीं है, जिस दिन मैं कर रही है, उस दिन भी कर लें.
There is no exactly. There is no prescribed formula. It is just like you are looking for a culprit or you are looking for a thief in your house.
Okay.
You have to look at more aggressively, repeatedly, all the time, morning, evening, afternoon. So maybe.
मैं फिर प्रैक्टिस करने का बंद करने पड़ेगी, मेरे को एंटीबायोटिक बीपी चेक करना पड़ेगा तो मेरे को मैम.
But at the same time, the point you are trying to make, and very often is, sometimes it start playing on your nerves.
Okay.
That I have to get my blood pressure monitor. I have to get my blood pressure monitor. You must have seen there must be n number of patients in your follow-up who would measure their blood pressure at say odd time and call you. My blood pressure is 160. What to do? So, having said that, hypertension we all believe, at least in males, 9 out of 10, if you are having headache and your glasses are all right, it is high blood pressure. In females, that figure might be 60%.
Okay.
So, in my clinical practice, if there is no obvious cause for headache, I presume it is because of blood pressure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ji, and thank you, Sachin. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Podar sir has a question.
No question, just comment. I think both the speakers were very well. Dr. Rajput, of course, is a very seasoned player. I think he is a very senior cardiologist. But I must congratulate Dr. Samsidi. I have heard you first time.
Very good.
You have given a talk in this forum, but I was not there that day. But I think you explained very well the pathophysiology, and what I understood, it is both cardio and renal protective health compared to amlodipine, because it doesn't cause reflex tachycardia, it doesn't cause increased glomerular hypertension, like that. So thank you, Dr. Samsidi, for an excellent.
Keep it up, Dr. Sachin.
Over to Dr. Tulsi sir. Sir, you have 10 minutes.
Oh, wonderful.
Very good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Yeah. So, first, Dr. Sanchiti, it's always a pleasure to listen to you because you are so learned. And let's talk a little about the renal benefits, about the drugs which reduce hypertension. Can we have some decorum at the back? Again, please. Okay, let me start again. So, Dr. Sanchiti, ACE and ARBs are the first line of treatment of choice in renal disease, with which reduces proteinuria per se. SGLT2 inhibitors also have become revolutionary in the treatment of albuminuria, which reduces albuminuria, and they are safe and well tolerated, and are now have changed the way we practice renal diseases today, and benefits in heart failure, CKD, and all-cause mortality, irrespective of the diabetic status. So important to know. Also, what SGLT2 inhibitors do is they, probably discontinuation of MRAs was low risk of hyperkalemia as well. But if you have to choose between the CCBs, Dr. Sanchiti, would you say probably the non-dihydropyridines would be the drug of choice here, because they reduce more albuminuria, proteinuria as compared to the dihydropyridines. But I understand they have metabolic profile which are not so congenial. They have negative chronotropic effects, entropic effects as well. So talk us about the CCBs, especially Dr. Chauhan also dwelt about, comparing amlodipine versus amlodipine versus cinodipine. So which CCBs has the highest reduction in albuminuria or proteinuria? Talk us about these.
Like you rightly said, there are two classes of CCBs, non-dihydropyridines being verapamil and diltiazem. Dihydropyridines are the ones that we are using.
Can we have some decorum again at the back?
So the traditional dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker that has been used in long-term clinical practice has been amlodipine, which unfortunately increases proteinuria. Because
Why does it increase? Is it because the constriction of the afferent arterioles?
No, it's because it dilates the afferent and the efferent remains relatively constricted. So the intraglomerular
This is what I
blood flow
said. It constricts the afferent arterioles.
No, sir, it dilates the afferent and the efferent remains relatively constricted. So it
That's
doesn't
what I
constrict
said.
it per se,
Yeah.
but it does not dilate.
Yeah.
So the net effect is that you end up getting more blood in the glomerular capillaries, the intraglomerular hypertension increases and the proteinuria increases.
Absolutely.
Now the way diltiazem and verapamil would work is they are negatively chronotropic, bromotropic, inotropic. So they would reduce the net cardiac output, so the net renal blood flow will also decrease. And that is how they would reduce the intraglomerular pressure. That is the hemodynamic action which we exploit when we want to reduce the proteinuria with diltiazem.
So the non-dihydropyridines dilate both the afferent and the afferent arterioles.
Their impact on dilation is minimal. They are negatively inotropic, chronotropic,
We know
and
that,
inotropic.
yeah.
So the cardiac output will fall. Once the cardiac output falls, the renal blood flow is 20% of the cardiac output. It will definitely fall. When that falls, the intraglomerular blood flow will naturally fall.
Absolutely.
When the intraglomerular blood flow falls, the proteinuria will reduce.
Absolutely.
But you cannot use diltiazem in majority of the CKD patients. 50% of CKD patients have diabetes. Diabetes in CKD uniquely predisposes you to IHD. This particular class of non-DHP CCBs cannot be used, especially when you have HFrEF in the background and the ejection fraction is low. You won't be able to use it.
No, you cannot.
So there is a certain set of population with primary glomerular diseases where we actually exploit this side effect or effect, you can say, of diltiazem, where if the patient is not able to achieve target proteinuria reduction levels with ACEs and ARBs and immunosuppression and with SGLT2, we end up adding diltiazem for its impact on proteinuria. But this is only in those patients who have primary glomerular diseases. It cannot be used the same way in diabetic CKDs.
I am no way advocating the use of non-dihydropyridines, but just to compare between the two, they have a more impact on reducing albuminuria or proteinuria, but they are not to be used because they have negative. I'll come to you later on, because they have negative chronotropic and inotropic effects, and they are not the drug, especially patients, especially if you are a cardiologist or acute like Dr. Rajput. Anyway, so let me proceed further. Talking about the beta blockers. Dr. Sanshiti, in CKD, we know sympathetic overactivity is commonly seen in CKD, and hence increased cardiovascular events with advanced CKD and CV events. Vasodilatory, we have vasodilatory beta blockers here. They are better tolerated and have effects on renal hemodynamics, reduce arrhythmia, reduce heart failure. So, any word on beta blockers in CKD, especially, because of its sympathetic overactivity as is seen in renal diseases? I know they are cardiometabolic, they are not safe to be used, they have a lot of side effects. Beta blockers.
Sir, So I'll first describe how hypertension is managed in general CKD populations. Relatively easier to manage when the GFR is somewhere between 30 to 60. You can get away with 2 drugs, maybe add a thiazide diuretic. It becomes increasingly difficult as the GFR falls below 30. And drugs like cilnidipine, even azelnidipine, are not going to cut it, despite being on maximum doses in combination with ACEs and ARBs. This is the kind of population in which we actually end up adding a beta blocker. Beta blockers are not our first line drugs. They are only first line drugs when we have background CHD, IHD, when we have HFrEF in the background, diabetics with IHD.
Heart failure?
Yes, diabetics with IHD, HFrEF. Not so much role in HFpEF, but in HFrEF definitely they would be the first drugs that we add. In specific, we would like to add carvedilol because we've seen excellent antihypertensive actions with carvedilol, excellent BP control. And you must remember that in CKD, what you want is not just to reduce numbers. You don't want to bring down the creatinine, you don't want to bring down the proteinuria. You want to prevent the patient from dying because of a cardiovascular reason. That's the most common cause of death. So in order to bring down cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, if there is a background where beta blockers need to be used as first line or even second line, they are added. This would typically be a CKD patient with a GFR anywhere between 45 and below, with background HFrEF, IHD in the background, maybe AF because CKD again is uniquely predisposed to AF. And then you end up adding a beta blocker. Our beta blocker of choice usually is carvedilol.
Right. So my last question to you would be regarding the CKM.
I'm sorry, sir. Tell me the full.
That's the cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome, which is a new term, which is an overlap of CVD, kidney disease, and type 2 diabetes with obesity.
Right, sir.
So, just a word about the CKM, cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome.
Sir, it's the same.
So,
shared pathogens,
it's not the same.
Shared risk factors.
So, we need to give drugs which have anti-atherosclerotic effects, like SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 agonists as well, not to forget MRAs as well. Thank you.
Very good.
Very good.
No, before I conclude, let me ask my favorite cardiologist friend, Dr. Rajput. I have just 2 cardiologist friends.
So just to touch that.
Okay.
See, there has never been any good quality trial about what we were discussing, non-diabetic CCDs and albumin. Because antihypertensive medication will reduce albuminuria, will reduce cardiovascular outcome. Is recently new finding for last 1.5 decades. By that time, we are not using diltiazem and isoptane for blood pressure for last more than a decade. So there is no information about them. So amlodipine reduces albuminuria to some extent. Not profound.
No, sir.
Not profound.
Not.
Cilnidipine better. Azelnidipine is still better. So that's how the therapies are involved.
Okay, and so Dr. Chauhan says just 2 minutes for me. Okay, so let me say that was an excellent talk, Dr. Rajput. So the goals, what do you say the gold standard today regarding the CCPs in hypertension would be the 3rd generation or the 4th generation, CCPs like cilnidipine or azelnidipine, and would this be the first line agent for hypertension, especially in CKD and elderly patients above the 60 years? Dr. Rajput?
Can be.
So why do you say that? Do they have some anti-atherosclerotic effects? They reduce blood pressure, they reduce heart rate, they reduce glomerular pressure, they reduce aldosterone, they reduce plaque volume, they reduce liver fibrosis, they prevent adverse LV remodeling, they reduce BNP, they inhibit BNP and a lot more. They reduce CIMT, they reduce heart rate due to its action on the T-type calcium channel blockers in the sinus node. So this, because of sympathetic overactivity, reduce CV events as well, improve erectile, not erectile, but endothelial dysfunction. So these would be the drug of choice. And what else? I think I was done here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have one question. On one hand, we say we should restrict sodium chloride to 5 grams per day or sodium 2.5. On the other hand, we say there is something adrenergic drive due to the hyponatremia. So in that case, how we will know about that? Because there is stimulation of RAS.
That 2 gram of sodium and which is equivalent to 5 to 6 grams of sodium chloride will not cause hyponatremia. Hyponatremia will happen if there is extra sodium loss or for some reason.
We should be very cautious about using thiazide group of the drugs. Second thing, sir, there is called night dipping.
Yeah, unless we have sodium loss, with that much salt intake, hyponatremia will not happen.
Okay, sir, one thing more I would like to ask you. There is called night dipping. When it is lost, what is the cause of the loss of the night dipping?
Night dipping.
Nocturnal dipping.
BP night dipping. There is regular night dipping in the machine night. BP comes down. What is the cause, physiological cause of this?
Because nocturnal night dipping is common. That happens in normal individuals. Because the sympathetic tone goes down. And blood pressure goes down. Resistance, everything goes down from sleep, from heart centers. But in hypertensive, when this auto-adjustment mechanism is lost, the night dipping is lost. And that's why there has been lots of discussion about that those medicines which restore the dipping pattern would be better.
What are those medicines, sir?
Diuretics are one of them, CCPs are one of them. But I must tell you, all these things came up and gone. You will find them discussion in the footnotes, but in major guidelines, it is not there. There has been observation how much they actually correlate, how much they guide the therapy in this film.
Yes, sir. There is also this BNP is lowered by this as a DPP.
I don't think it is any significant factor.
It decreases the, you see BNP, sir. It decreases BNP and it is due to left ventricular revolving and increase of the endoscopic pressure.
All these findings are accidental findings of no clinical relevance. Accidental findings of no clinical relevance unless there is a volume overload, unless there is a BNP which is higher range, they are no.
Dr. Kantur sir, I would request now Dr. Lathar sir to summarize this wonderful CME for us. At the same time, I would like to give a very big hand to the wonderful marketing team of IPCA to put up a very, very good CME for all of us. I want to thank Dr. Rajiv Rajput sir and Dr. Sanskrit Chauhan to give a wonderful deliberation on this new calcium channel blocker as repeat. Dr. Lathar, over to you sir.
Thank you for joining us today. I think it was a wonderful and healthy discussion and all the questions were answered very well. Thank you.